Well, good evening. Welcome to this um, this session of Creekside Book by Book, and we are going to be reading, finishing up Genesis 30 and going all the way through Genesis 33. And so we're going to take a trip with Jacob, leaving the land of his ancestral homeland with Laban and his family, and coming back home to the land that God had promised to Abraham. And so there's going to be some personal transformation in Jacob's life, but we'll also see that the deceiver is going to deceive, the trickster is going to trickster. So that's kind of a part of Jacob's identity throughout the narrative. So let's jump in with verse 25. Last week we ended with the baby wars, with all of the Jacob's wives and concubines all having kids, and so they have built um, their family up, and so now he is ready to start moving home. So let's look at verse 25. All right. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." But Laban said to him, If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. He added, "Name your wages, and I will pay them." Jacob said to him, "You know how hard I have worked for you, and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came, the little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household?" "What shall I give you?" he asked. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied. "But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark colored lamb, every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages, and my honesty will testify for me in the future. Whenever you check on the wages you have paid me, any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark colored, will be considered stolen." "Agreed," said Laban. "Let it be as you have said." That same day, he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. Jacob, however, took fresh cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees, and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in the watering troughs so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they mated in front of these branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself and did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals so they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban and the strong ones to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. All right, so this is kind of a uh, weird story, but it's starting with Jacob saying, "Look, I've worked hard for you. I'm ready to go home, and so I'm ready to take my wives and kids and get out of here." But Laban, he says here clearly, like, "The Lord revealed to me in divination." And that is a big red flag for the Jewish reader. And it should be a red flag for us because divination will be later ruled completely illegal and punishable by death in the law that Moses will give. And so for the Lord to speak to Laban through whatever divination practice Laban was using is unusual, but it reveals to us that Laban and Jacob are on two different religious paths. They are not um, walking the same road of faithfulness to the Lord. And we haven't really seen Jacob being super religious. We did see him have an encounter with the Lord when he saw the stairway to heaven as he was running away from Esau. And so we did see him have that kind of encounter, but he up to this point he hasn't really prayed. He hasn't really done much that shows that he is faithful to the Lord. But the narrator of Genesis is showing us that Laban is different. Laban is problematic. But we also have seen with Laban that he is a deceiver. He deceived Jacob when he wanted to marry Rachel and switched Rachel for Leah. So Laban is a deceiver and Jacob is a deceiver. And so even as Laban is talking to Jacob about leaving, how much of his word should we believe? Like, did the Lord really say to Laban that that Jacob was the reason he was being blessed, or is Laban just trying to get Jacob to stay? And so he's using whatever language he thinks might help Jacob decide to stay. So there's a little bit of ambiguity with the character of Laban, his personal character here. And one of the reasons why divination in the law, and we'll get to this, is so troubling and it's ruled illegal for the people of God is because it is trying to control the spiritual forces of this world, and even trying to control God, to try to get God to do what you want, to speak when you want him to speak, those kinds of things. And that's not how God operates in the world. God will do what God will do. And as we walk through the narrative of Genesis, we should be aware that God is working all throughout and doing his work in his way, in his will. And so the characters and the people of Genesis are being carried along God's plan to fill the earth, to create a nation of Israel. All of these things are happening, and God is directing their steps. And so we should keep that in mind as well. So Jacob wants to leave. He's been in Laban's family, his household, for 20 years. And so he's been there a long time. And so he's ready to go home. And but Laban also is very selfish and he wants him to stay so he can continue to be wealthy. And so they come up with this plan. Jacob's like, hey, why don't you just give me all of the speckled or spotted flocks, the goats and sheep? Partly because those would have been seen as less valuable, less special. And so Jacob is telling Laban, like, give me the weak, give me the undesirable. Like, you don't want them, I'll take them. And so Laban's like, okay, sure, let's do that. But at the same time, Laban is taking those flocks, that are speckled and spotted, and he's removing them from Jacob. He's saying, yeah, you can have all of them. But then he says to his sons, like, go take all of them 3 days away. So Laban is agreeing to something that is then going to be made impossible for Jacob to receive. So he is just a really terrible person. He's not a good guy. And so when we think about Jacob's life, Jacob is not painted as a great guy throughout most of his account in Genesis. I mean, he is a deceiver. He is a trickster. And but here even he's getting tricked. But yet Jacob has a plan. And this is where the weirdness of this passage comes in, is he takes the bark of these trees and he makes them spotted and striped and all this different stuff, and he puts it where the animals are mating, and he puts it in the troughs. He puts it all around these flocks that are not speckled or spotted. And when these animals mate, they have animals that are speckled and spotted. And so, what is that about? One of the things that, like in reading through commentaries talking about this, is nowhere in ancient literature is there anywhere where people had this as a theory of how to make speckled or spotted flocks. Jacob just does this, and we don't know if this is something that the Lord like said in a dream or something. Jacob, do this and it'll all happen. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, this is weird as we're reading this, like, this is very strange, how is this coming about? But he just does this, and it has the desired result, that the flocks start to become speckled and spotted. And so Laban, even though he tried to remove the possibility for Jacob to become wealthy through the flocks, Jacob is still becoming very wealthy, and he is getting more and more from Laban than Laban ever thought possible. And so he seems at the onset to be setting out for a smaller wage for his work, but he turns out to have a tremendous amount of wealth that comes his way. Yeah, so there's no good scientific reason or principle for what Jacob's doing. This wasn't a part of animal husbandry in ancient times, but it's like it is later here. We're going to see Jacob does tell Laban, like, God told me in a dream to do this, but it's still a very weird thing, and it shouldn't work. But God said that the descendants of Abraham would be blessed. And here is one of the ways that God is blessing the descendants of Abraham. Jacob, while he is a foreigner in a distant land, is being blessed. So let's keep going here in verse 31:1, because they notice something is afoot with Jacob. Jacob heard from that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude towards him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out of the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with flocks were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen that the Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what he was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Then when Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. All right, so Jacob's plan is working. Laban's sons are recognizing that their flocks are shrinking while Jacob's flocks are growing. And it is working in accordance with the agreement that Jacob and Laban made, but it is not right in their eyes. Somehow Jacob is cheating them. And so their tension begins to grow between Laban's household and Jacob. And so he's ready to go, and he gets Rachel and Leah ready to go to say, we got to get out of here. We got to go home. Um, your father is ripping me off. He's not a good dude, and let's go. And Rachel's response is interesting here. They're both of their complaint is saying, like, aren't we basically foreigners in our father's house? They recognize that Laban has treated them like property, and their names actually mean like cow and ewe, like cow and sheep. That's their name. Like, he treats them like property, and like they are livestock, and so they're disillusioned with their father already. And so when Jacob says it's time to go, they're ready to go. And we see their plan to leave um, is confirmed, and so they get ready to go. And when they leave, they choose to leave during the busy time for Laban. They're shearing sheep, and so this is, I'm not a farmer person. I don't know all the ins and outs of shearing sheep, but I know that you need to do it. And there are instances of sheep that have not been sheared, and where they, like, if they get too wet, they fall over. Like, there's things like you got to watch out for the sheep. And so he's getting the wool off of all the sheep, and then he's probably using that wool to as a trade with other people. Like, it's a commodity. And so they're busy doing that work. And so Jacob's like, now's the time to get out of here. And so they leave while Jacob is or while Laban is busy, and they're gone for 3 days before Laban notices. Like, this is like part of their plan. But we also see that Rachel steals from Laban. And the household gods were probably something that um, their tribe, their family held on to, kind of like as a good luck or as a blessing. One of my favorite donut places in all the world is Countryside Donuts in Mount Terrace. Great donuts. Inside Countryside, they have a little shrine to Buddha. And I mean, I'm sure you've seen this at different restaurants and different places of business where they'll have a Buddha um, in the in the establishment somewhere. And most of the people that I've talked to in these different places, like, they don't worship Buddha, but they do think Buddha brings them luck. And it's the similar kind of thing with these household gods. Laban is not a true follower of Yahweh. He's got all kinds of different spiritual practices in his world, and Rachel grew up in that environment too. And so she probably, leaving, took those to say, well, we need some luck too in our family as we're starting out and heading home. Like, she doesn't know who Jacob uh, serves. She doesn't really know all that there is to know about the Lord. So there's things that are unknown to Rachel about the family that she's going into as a follower of Yahweh. And even here, Jacob says, like, God gave me this dream, and he told me that he's watching out for me, that he's going to vindicate me. Like, essentially, like, I see that Laban is ripping you off, and I have been making these things happen for you so that you can have the speckled and spotted sheep. Like, I've been guiding and directing all of this. And he confirms that by saying, I am the God you met at Bethel, reminding him about 20 years ago when he had the experience with the stairway to heaven. And he's like, remember, I was at Bethel. I'm the same God. And now I'm calling you back home. And so I'm sure Jacob probably told Rachel this story about the angel and the stairway to heaven and all these different things. But he probably wasn't really discipling his family in this regard. So Rachel takes this spiritual practice that she knows and steals it. and they head out. So pick up in verse 22. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you, but last night the God of your father said to me, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household, but why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered Laban, "I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I am having my period." So he searched but could not find the household gods. Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. "What is my crime?" he asked Laban. "How have I wronged you, that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it in here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us. I've been with you 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring your animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your two daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." Laban answered Jacob, "The women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be as a witness between us." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, "Gather some stones." So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Yeger Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Galid. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." That is why it was called Galid. It was also called Mitzpah, because he said, "May the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives beside my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me." Laban also said to Jacob, "Here is this heap, and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. So Jacob leaves. 3 days out, Laban is able to catch up with him. And it makes sense that Laban was able to catch up to him because Jacob has a tremendous entourage. He's got his wives, his kids, and all these flocks. And so he can't travel as fast as Laban can to cover such a great distance. And so Laban catches up. And what's interesting here is we have seen in Abraham's life, in Isaac's life, and now in Jacob's life, the Lord warning somebody in a dream. The Lord warned Pharaoh and Abimelech not to do anything to Sarah or to Rebecca. And now here, the Lord is warning Laban, don't do anything to Jacob. And so God is showing up in people's lives, protecting the family that God has made this covenant with as he's starting out the nation of Israel. And so we are seeing these echoes and repeated patterns in the life of the patriarchs. And Laban probably needed this confirmation and this warning because he came to do harm to Jacob, most likely. Because he, as you read through, he says things that make it sound like all of this is mine and you have stolen it from me. And so he's ready to do battle with Jacob, even though Jacob has just a family. He doesn't have an army. And Laban understands, like, you want to go home, you want to be with your family. I get it. But why did you lie? Why did you just leave? Why did you not let me bless you and send you off? And there are times when in all of our lives where sometimes it's just like, it's just easier to go. And, people, it's hard to leave a situation like where somebody's going to throw you a party partly because they want you to stay. But Jacob's like, I need to go. It's time to go. No more. And so Laban is trying to convince him, like, I would have been good to you. But Jacob's over and over again, like, look, I worked really hard for you. And I suffered for you. And now I'm ready to go and start my family, my own household, to continue in the land that God had promised my grandfather and my father. And so, yeah, he's like, I'm not sticking around for your plans, Laban. God's got plans. I'm following those plans. And so he says, like, look, all this is mine, but look around. If you see anything stolen, we'll kill that person, which is an intense thing to say when you don't have all the information. And Jacob doesn't know what Rachel has done. And so Rachel is hiding the idols by sitting on them in her saddle on the camel. And, her excuse is that she's on her period. And she might be on her period, why she can't get up and honor her father's presence and all this stuff. But one of the things in ancient culture, why this excuse stands up, or why it holds up, is because there were belief that women who were on their period were unclean, or in some cultures even evil during that time. And so Laban is like, I don't want anything to do with that. So Rachel hides the idol, the household gods, because by claiming to be on her period. And one of the things that's interesting here, like the Levitical law will put in place stipulations about what women, while they're menstruating, what they must do. And because there are laws that we'll talk about, like being ceremonially unclean during their period, and all of these different stipulations. And so the writer of Genesis, by including this detail, is telling us something that's kind of interesting, because we read the Bible and we see that there is no God but one, and it's the Lord Yahweh is our God. And for Rachel to sit on the idols while she's on her period, she's actually making them unclean. She's defiling them also. And so even those household gods that she stole, she is making worthless. So the writer of Genesis is including this detail, and it could be because he wants us to understand, like, these household gods are nothing. They're basically garbage in this whole story. So Laban doesn't find anything, and but he does say, like, look, all of these, your wives, your grandkids, they're your flocks, they're all from me. They're basically, they were mine, but now let's make peace. Let's just clean the slate and move on. And so they set up these pillars and heaps, these altars and memorial piles of stones. And the main purpose for these is to serve as markers between families to say, if you cross this line, there could be trouble for us. And so if you want to stay healthy, don't come across this line again, which is an intense statement and between two families. But Laban feels like he's been ripped off. Jacob feels like he's been ripped off. And so instead of trying to, like, say, like, well, let's come back together and let's be friends, like, no, we're going to set up these pillars, and the Lord is going to keep watch between us so that neither of us will break this covenant about going back and forth. And Laban just is like, treat my family well, treat these people well, and there shouldn't be a problem. So this is how this situation ends. Jacob is coming back in to the land that God had promised Abraham. He's been in exile of a sort, and he is now coming home. One of the things that we see in Scripture, though, is the exile in the future will be in the land of the east. It will be like northeast, in the places where Abraham's family came from. And so even in Jacob's life, he had a season of exile. The Lord brought him home, and we will see in the history of Israel, or I should say, for these readers, the future of Israel, there will be an exile, and the Lord will bring them home. And so there are these echoes and patterns in Scripture that are just very interesting. So now he's going home, but remember why he left in the first place was because he had deceived his father and his brother, and Esau was ready to kill him. And so he's coming home. So he's like, I should try to figure out how to make peace with my brother. So that's what we pick up in 32:1. Jacob also went on his way, and the angel of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, this is the camp of God. So he named that place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, this is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my lord that I may find favor in your eyes. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him, which is a lot of men. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me and also my mothers, also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. Jacob spent the night there, and from what he had with him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He put them in the care of his servants, each herd by itself, and said to his servants, "Go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds." He instructed the one in the lead, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks, 'Who do you belong to, and where are you going, and who owns all these animals in front of you?' Then you are to say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us.'" He also instructed the second, the third, and all the others who followed the herds. "You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say, 'Your servant Jacob is coming behind us.'" For he thought, "I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me." So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. All right. So as he's coming back into the land, remember when he left the land, when he left Bethel, he had the encounter with the angel of the Lord, and he saw the stairway of angels up and down into heaven, and it was a wonderful experience. And he said, "Surely this is the house of God." That's why it's called Bethel. And so that was when he left the land, and now he's coming back into the land, and he encounters angels again, and so there is something spiritually significant for the people of Jacob's family as they are entering into this land. It's a in the technical term for the writing that's happening, it's called an inclusio. And so the writer is telling us this on purpose, like these angels are blessing him as he goes and welcoming him as he returns. And so this is a confirmation for Jacob that he's on the right path. But then he also knows, like, I need to make peace with my brother. So he sends the servants and said, "Hey, Jacob's back, and he is wants to see you." And the servants come back like, "Hey, your brother's coming with an army. Heads up." If we remember Abraham, he fought the five kingdoms with an army of 318 men. And so now Jacob is hearing that his brother Esau is coming with 400 men, more men than Abraham had. Like, this is bad news for Jacob. So he's anxious, and so he starts building a plan because Jacob's a schemer, and so he starts building this plan to say, "All right, I'm gonna send ahead all of these different flocks, and each flock is a gift to Esau to say, 'Hey, this is for you.' Jacob's coming. 'Hey, this is for you. Jacob wants you to have this. Hey, remember how Jacob ripped you off? Hey, he's trying to make it right.'" And so he's sending all of these animals ahead, thinking he's going to earn grace with his brother Esau, and so that is the plan. And so while they're going on ahead, he spends the night at the camp, and something amazing happens in verse 22. That night, Jacob got up and took his two wives, his two female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. So this is a significant moment in Jacob's life. And while he is completely alone, he has this encounter with a man, a stranger. Then they're wrestling. Like, this this mysterious person just starts grappling with Jacob, and he won't stop. And they wrestle all night. And what's the only thing that gets him to stop is basically the 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 wrestler uh, dislocates Jacob's hip, and uh, dislocation of joints of the ball socket joints, like your shoulders and hips, is really painful. And you're like, I know this, both of my shoulders have been dislocated. It is really painful. The hardest joint to dislocate in your entire body is your hip. It is really, really painful when that happens. And so like think of the amount of strength that God has, or that Jacob has, as he's wrestling this mysterious figure, that Jacob will say, like, this was God. I wrestled God. And the only way that God could get him to stop was by dislocating his hip. This is a level of commitment and tenacity that Jacob has that is amazing. And so um, Jacob won't let go until the man blesses him, and his blessing like is in continuation with what God has already promised to Abraham's descendants. Like, he will be blessed. But the significance is that the name change. And in the Bible, when there is a name change, that is a very important thing when God changes somebody's name in the Old Testament. So Abraham, great father, became Abram became Abraham, and Abram means great father. Abraham means father of many. And now here we have Jacob, which means deceiver, to Israel, which means wrestled with God and overcome, wrestled with humanity and overcome. This is a man who is tenacious and is an overcomer, and this is his new identity, Israel. And he is a wrestler. And the rest of his life, he's going to have this limp that will mark him as the person who overcomes. And it's a reminder to him to say, like, uh, don't forget what you have been through. Something that I say often in church and sermons is, God doesn't waste our experiences, but we do when we forget what we've been through. And so for Israel here now to have this radical experience, name change, a permanent mark in his body, to remember what God has done and to remember how God has sustained him through all of this. He has wrestled and he has overcome. And so it's important. This is a pivotal moment for Jacob. And I would just encourage you, if there are seasons and moments that like where you have had tremendous transformation in your own life, don't forget, mark it down somehow, some way. And maybe, God will do something where you will remember this. And I have an example. When my wife was pregnant with our son, Judah, and I've shared this before as well, but it was a really stressful time in our life. And there was a lot of fear about losing the baby and just our own jobs and all kinds of different stuff happening. And I had to learn to trust the Lord in a profound way during that 9 months. And one of the things that happened was one day I woke up with a gray patch of hair right here. And I was just there that day, one day. And that little patch of gray hair is something that when I see it, I remember God sustained me through the hardest time of my life. And it's an encouragement to me. So I would encourage you to, if there are things like that, don't hide your limp, don't hide your gray patch of hair, don't like say, no, this is what God has done for me, and own it and say, God is faithful and he has sustained me. So we have one more section of scripture to look at, and because now Jacob, he set his family aside of the river. He was all by himself, and now he's limping. He's coming to the other side of the river. And 33 verse 1 says, Jacob looked up, and there was Esau. Good morning. Here's an army coming with 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. So even here, he's showing preference to his wife and children, like servants up front, Leah next, and then Rachel and Joseph last, because they are the most important to him. But he's going up and he's bowing and showing reverence to Esau, trying to earn his favor and humble himself before his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. "Who are these with you?" he asked. Jacob answered, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." Then the female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all, Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, "What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds I met?" "To find favor in your eyes, my lord," he said. But Esau said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." "No, please," said Jacob. "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the presents that were brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. Then Esau said, "Let us be on our way. I'll accompany you." But Jacob said, "My Lord knows that the children are tender and that I must care for the ewes and cows that are nursing their young. If they are driven hard just one day, all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servants while I move along slowly at the pace of the flocks and herds before me and the pace of the children until I come to my Lord at Seir." Esau said, "Then let me leave some of my men with you." "But why do that?" Jacob asked. Let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord." So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Sukkot, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Sukkot. After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver, he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. There he set up an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. So, this moment of confrontation is finally here. We have this great drama set up throughout the book of Genesis up to this point. He's running away from his brother, he's running away from Laban, and there's conflict all around Jacob. And as he's coming home, he's trying to make peace and do all the right things. And Esau is just so happy to see his brother. He's not going to kill him, he's not going to murder him. And we don't know anything about Esau, like what happened to him while Jacob was away. The writer doesn't tell us, but he's blessed. He has more than enough, and he is welcoming his brother home. And that is an amazing turn of events. And it is only by the favor of God. And Jacob is recognizing this. Like, God has been protecting Jacob for the last 20 years, and God is going to continue protecting him as he's coming back home. It's pretty amazing. Now, Jacob is still not like a perfect person, because even here, as Esau is saying, "Hey, come home to my city, be with me, like come along," and Jacob says, "Yeah, sure, I'll come along later. I got to go at my own pace." But instead of going to Edom and to Seir, which is their capital city where Esau is basically setting up his world, he goes the other way. He goes to Sukkot and ultimately to Shechem. And that's where he establishes his home base. And so even there, he's still maybe deceiving Jacob or deceiving Esau by saying, "Yeah, I'll come," and go the other way. Or a more charitable read could be say, like, Jacob is saying, "I will come eventually to Seir, but let me go and establish my home later over here, somewhere else." So it could be the more charitable read is he is saying, "I will eventually get to Seir." We don't know for sure what is happening here, but he gets up to Sukkot, which means shelters. And so he builds his shelters, and then he goes to Shechem, and he builds another altar. So Abraham and Jacob and Isaac, they have these encounters and these significant moments of their lives. They build altars to commemorate what God has done. And here, the altar that he named is El Elohe Israel, and El is one of the names for God, and so it means God is the God of Israel. And so he is locking in to trusting the Lord for himself, not just Abraham's faith, not just Isaac's faith, but his own faith. And we see that in his prayer. The first time we ever see Jacob praying is when he's coming back into the land. He's like, look, God, I need your help. Uh, we see that he's having this encounter with the Lord and the wrestling with the Lord. There's all kinds of things happening in Jacob in Israel's life that is becoming, or like his relationship with the Lord is becoming more tangible for him. And so while he is far from perfect, he is becoming a more faithful follower of Yahweh. And so that's setting us up for the next chapter in Jacob's life as he's back in the land. His kids, Joseph, there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen that's going to be like, this isn't great. But there is still a arc towards becoming more and more the people of God over time as they see God intervene and lead them to become the nation that he is calling them to become. So that is our passage for tonight. So if there are any questions, I'd love to chat about those questions and see if there can be any clarity. If there's something that was confusing, I'd love to clear those up as well. So anything.
I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
I was really curious, like you mentioned briefly how like there's just like these echoes and patterns of scripture, right? And how like yeah, throughout like the people of Israel's story, like there's these patterns that happen over and over. And I was just wondering if like in what you've studied and what you've read, like what the significance of that is. Yeah, like the significance of those patterns and how it's very repetitive. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because one of the questions that people have is, um, are these patterns signs of God's providence in the history of his people? Or are these patterns in place because the the writers and compilers of the oral history of Israel, they are just really trying to emphasize, like, look at what is happening and seeing our repetition in history. And like I just read a quote from Mark Twain, like, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Mm.
And thinking through our own history in America, where we have these moments of peace and then moments of great conflict, peace, conflict, peace, conflict, peace, conflict. Like that is part of our American history, and usually the greatest conflicts are with ourselves. And so history rhymes. And with the people of Israel, looking at these design patterns, the writers and compilers of scripture are like, they know the stories and they're telling the stories. And for hundreds of years, these are just oral traditions that they are sharing around around the campfire, the gatherings, and because they didn't have like synagogues and the temple for a long time, so they just told the stories. And so when they heard the story of Jacob going to into exile and coming back, that's something that when the people of Israel later would go into exile, they'd be like, look at what God had done for Jacob, and look what he can do for us. And so holding on to those like key moments, the writers and compilers and editors, like elevate those experiences, partly because they want the people to find comfort in God's faithfulness, his past faithfulness, and his present faithfulness, because history rhymes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, like the Bible Project is a great resource, but they talk a lot about design patterns in Scripture.
Mm.
And so the lead researcher is a guy named Dr. Timothy Mackey, and so he talks a lot about design patterns. And so I think it's thebibleproject.org, and if you just type in design pattern in their search function, I'm sure you'll find
Mm.
more. Um, their podcast has a lot about design patterns as well. So um, yeah, but one of the questions, like with uh, the textual um analysis and trying to understand, like, are there different voices throughout history, different writers throughout history that may be um giving clarifying comments throughout the text. And so what we have in the Pentateuch, the five books of Moses in particular, like those are, we believe those are inspired words from the Lord. But there are also instances where there may have been an editor in the hundreds of years in the future from Moses that maybe wrote in a clarifying comment where they would have said, like, because there's one instance in particular where Moses, it's referring to Moses and it says Moses was the most humble man in all of the earth or whatever, right? Moses probably didn't write that about himself. Somebody wrote that about Moses later. And so those kinds of little things that come up are um, it's called textual criticism, where there could be different eras throughout the history of Israel where people wrote in clarifying statements that kind of got wrapped up into the whole collection of the Pentateuch, and we can't know for sure what is what. And so there's different theories about what could be a later editor or transcriber, like that got wrapped up in there. We can't know. And so we look at these design patterns and say, this could be part of that as well, where somebody from, hundreds of years in the future was like writing out the text again and was like, do you guys see this awesome thing that's happening here and how this is our exact situation right now? So that could be happening as well, but we can't know because we're hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years divorced from the writing of these texts. And so it's just theories that people have. So,
Mhm.
yeah. But if that is something that you are interested in, it is called textual criticism. Um, it's not something that we need to be afraid of. People aren't trying to take the Bible away from us. They're just, the criticism is trying to bring clarity to uh, eras of scripture. So,
Mhm.
yeah. I probably got way too out in the weeds, but
No, it was really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing all of that.
when I first took Pentateuch at Northwest, my professor, Dr. Hobson, he spent the first week of my 3-week summer school program talking about textual criticism. So, like, we have 3 weeks to talk about the five books of Moses. 1 week was just about textual criticism. It's like, what's happening right now?
Mm.
So, but it was interesting. So, stuck with me. Good job, Dr. Hobson. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Do you really get that God wanted to wrestle with Jacob? I don't really get that. I don't know if you do, but I've read it so many times. I don't get it. Did he know it was God? Did
Yeah.
it was a man? It looked like a man, and then you must bless me when he was already blessed. I don't know. Anyway, you don't have to try to explain it, but I just have never been able to put together that whole thing.
Yeah, and it is a really, really fascinating event. Um, and it's one of those passages that, like, if you really want to get a congregation, like, fired up, you can preach this passage and say, just hold on to Jesus, hold on through the hard time. And you can get people really fired up about it. But it's also one of those things where it's like, this is a one-time event in scripture, and it is not saying to go and do likewise, right? And so it's a descriptive passage, not a prescriptive passage. But the principle that we ultimately need to get from here is God is confronting Jacob, and we don't really know why. Like, God's just going to wrestle him. And it's the way the narrator tells us is Jacob probably didn't understand who this was right away. But we know earlier, and last week we looked at Jacob, and he was able to move the stone off of the well by himself. So Jacob is really strong. And so he, sent all of the people away, probably because he's never been afraid of somebody hurting him physically before. And he's like, if somebody comes, I can take them. I'm really strong. And so here's this mystery person who's stronger than Jacob. So Jacob's like, well, I'm like Hulk smash. I'm the strongest one there is here. So what is this all about? And so that's why he's holding on to him. It's like, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. Like, somewhere along the way, he must have had this revelation, like, this is a supernatural being. So whether or not he's like, this is God as he's wrestling, like, you're God, I don't know, but he's having.
Why do you want to fight God?
Well, probably because Jacob is just stubborn. Like that. He seems throughout his text like he's a pretty stubborn dude. Like, I'm gonna outwork you, Laban. I'm gonna just wear you
So
down.
This guy shows up. He doesn't know who he is. Maybe he looks different or something, and he starts fighting him.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, it looks like.
Like,
So, to be clear, a man wrestled with him till daybreak.
so the man started it then.
Yeah, the man started it. The man, like, Jacob was probably sleeping on his rock pillows like he's known to do. And the man just was like, all right, we're doing this. And just like started grappling with him. So it doesn't look like Jacob was picking this fight, but Jacob is also not going to back down. So yeah, it's a weird story. It is so weird.
It's a weird story.
And even this thing at the end where it's like, because Israel walked with a limp, now they never eat that tendon in an animal. Like, that's not in the law later. Like, that's not something that the Mosaic law tells people not to do. That's just something that people kept doing. And so, like, even thinking about like how we remember our stories when families would like butcher like their animals and prepare to eat, like the father would take that tendon and say, we don't eat this. Let me tell you a story about our forefather Jacob. One night, Hulk smash was just taken asleep, and God came and wrestled him and dislocated his hip. And so we remember this tendon here that holds your hip together. Don't eat that, as a way to remember what God did to Israel and how we are like Israel and that we wrestle and we overcome.
Did they eat other tendons?
Oh, they could, yeah.
I know, but would you?
Well, there's a difference between could you and would you. Have you ever been to a pho restaurant? Like, they serve tripe. Ugh, no, thank you.
No, thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that people do eat that most of us probably wouldn't be like, yeah, that sounds good. No, thanks.
Earlier in Jacob's story, I think we had talked about him doing something that made it appear as though he was a giant.
Yeah.
So could this affirm that he actually probably was a giant, this wrestling with God?
Maybe. It's just so, like, we don't know. We don't have any indication that his father or grandfather were giants. But like the story is that his ability to move the rock off the well, like doing that by himself. That's where the idea that Jacob was a giant, that's where that comes from. And so, yeah. So this is like, could be just confirmation, like Jacob is super strong. So he might not be a giant, but he is strong. So,
But not hairy.
Yeah, I mean like super strong. Probably not necessarily a giant, but super strong.
yeah,
You
like Superman. Like,
Yeah.
this is one of the things that I have to think about in my life. Okay, like Superman is really strong, right? But he never works out.
right. Yeah.
How's that happening? And like, if he was to try to like bench press, like actually like build his super muscles, how much would he have to lift? Like, they wouldn't have like there's nothing that can make Superman super strong. So why does he have muscles at all? I don't know. These are the deep questions of my life.
I love that. That's
Jason,
hilarious.
that's weird.
I know. So that's
Jason, I had a quick question just off of what we were saying here. In verse 25, it says, when the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched his socket. So like he said that he could not overpower him. You mentioned how you think that Jacob is stubborn. Do you think that it's meaning not necessarily physically, but like that mental willpower to like keep fighting or whatever? Because yeah, just
yeah, possibly. I mean, there's a tenacity that comes just from stubbornness. So like if you've ever done manual labor, there's a point where like, and in the project where your body is done, but your brain is like, I just want to finish.
Mhm.
And you kind of like power through that. And like at the end of the day, you're like, I don't know how I did that. Like, I was so tired. And that could be part of it, is like, I'm just not going to quit.
Mhm.
And, that's one of the things, like when I do read this passage and I like reflect on it, like if there's any characteristic that I want from Jacob's life, it's just, I don't want to quit. I don't want to be a
Mhm.
quitter.
Mhm.
I want to be somebody who's like, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
And Jacob, he never quit. He did other stuff, like deceived people and all kinds of stuff. I don't want to be like that, but he was just tenacious. So, yeah. All right. Any other questions, thoughts? All right. Well, next week, like I said, we're going to take 3 weeks off. Basically, is how it's going to break down. And so when we come back, we're going to read some of the tragic stories of Jacob's family, and so we will see that things are not always easy for these folks, but part of that is all working towards shaping the nation of Israel to become the people that God has envisioned for them to be, a nation that's greater than just one family. So, yeah. All right. Well, you guys, I hope you all have a great Christmas. And if you are wanting to join us for caroling this Saturday at 3 p.m., be sure to click on the link in the email, or on Facebook. I made a video yesterday. So, and you can register and join us to carol. It'll be super fun. So, yeah. So I will see you all later, and have a great Christmas and Happy New Year.
Blessings to you, Jason.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so much,
Jason.
Jason.
All right. Happy New Year.